A young boy, shivering in nothing but shorts, wandered the streets with bare feet. His steps were slow, his body trembling from the chill. Passers-by glanced at him, but quickly turned away, unsure of what to do. Then came an officer, a man who was just doing his routine patrol. What happened next caught everyone by surprise. The officer stopped and approached the boy. Kneeling in the snow, he asked him a simple question: "Where are your shoes?" The boy looked down, his voice barely audible as he explained he didn't have any. It was a moment of quiet vulnerability that could have easily gone unnoticed, but not for this officer. What he did in that moment left onlookers stunned. Instead of scolding the boy or walking away, the officer did something nobody expected. He took off a pair of sneakers he had brought with him and handed them to the boy. But it didn't end there. What happened afterward turned this small, heartfelt act into a story that would inspire an entire community. You won't believe the ripple effect that started with this one simple gesture of kindness. Stay tuned as we take you through the incredible aftermath of this seemingly small act of humanity and how it changed more lives than anyone could have imagined. The boy's face lit up with a mix of surprise and disbelief as he accepted the sneakers. They weren't brand new, but they were warm, sturdy, and more than he had hoped for on such a cold day. The officer knelt there for a moment, helping the boy put them on, tying the laces with care. It was a small gesture, but the weight of it was clear to anyone watching. The boy's feet were no longer exposed to the biting cold, and for the first time in what seemed like hours, he managed a smile. But as heartwarming as the moment was, questions lingered. Who was this boy? Why was he out in the freezing weather without proper clothes? And why did this officer, a stranger to him, carry shoes in his patrol bag in the first place? The answers were unclear, but the scene had already started drawing attention. A few passers-by paused to take notice, their curiosity piqued by the sight of the boy and the officer in the snow. Later, a small group of onlookers would recall how the officer spoke to the boy in hushed tones, listening intently to his story. Whatever the boy said clearly struck a chord with him. The officer's expression shifted, his usual professional demeanor giving way to genuine concern. It was as if, in that moment, he had decided that this wasn't going to be just another day on the job. Though the boy thanked him and prepared to leave, the officer didn't let him walk away without asking one last question. What he asked and what the boy answered would set into motion a series of events that no one could have predicted, leaving the community forever changed. As the boy prepared to leave, the officer gently asked, "Where's home?" The boy hesitated, looking down at the snow-covered ground. His silence spoke louder than words. The officer could sense that something wasn't right. He knew he couldn't just let the boy walk away without understanding his situation. After a moment, the boy finally murmured, "I don't really have one." Those few words hung in the cold air, heavy with meaning. The officer's heart sank. He had seen cases like this before, but this one felt different. This wasn't just a boy in need of shoes. It was a child who seemed to be fighting battles far bigger than himself. Wanting to help, but not wanting to pressure the boy, the officer carefully asked if there was anyone he could call or a place the boy felt safe. The boy shook his head, explaining that his family had fallen on hard times, leaving him without a stable home. He had been moving from place to place, trying to get by. Meanwhile, word of the officer's gesture had started to spread. Someone who had witnessed the scene posted a photo online, and within hours, it began gaining traction. People were moved by the simple act of kindness and wanted to know more about the boy's story. The community, which had been quiet and disconnected during the harsh winter months, suddenly found itself buzzing with curiosity and concern. Back on the snowy street, the officer decided he couldn't let the boy leave without a plan. He offered to take him to a nearby shelter to warm up and get some food, but the boy hesitated. He was wary of trusting strangers, even one who had shown him kindness. The officer understood and didn't push, but he assured the boy that he wasn't alone anymore. Unbeknownst to either of them, this small act of compassion was already beginning to spark something much bigger. The story was far from over. And what would happen next would reveal the power of a community coming together for one of its own. The officer stayed with the boy, his mind racing with ways to help without scaring him off. He didn't want to overwhelm him, but also couldn't bear the thought of letting him walk back into the freezing streets alone. Finally, he convinced the boy to sit in his warm patrol car, just for a few minutes, to escape the biting wind. The boy reluctantly agreed, and as they sat in the warmth, he began to open up a little more. He talked about how hard it had been, moving from place to place, trying to stay invisible so no one would judge him. He didn't want pity, he just wanted to feel normal again. As they talked, the officer realized this boy's resilience and independence were remarkable, but it was clear he needed more than just shoes. He needed stability, support, and the reassurance that he wasn't alone. The officer made a quiet vow to do whatever he could to help, even if he didn't have all the answers yet. Meanwhile, the photo of the boy and the officer had gone viral, sparking a wave of responses. People from the local community and beyond started reaching out, asking how they could help. Donations of warm clothes, shoes, and food poured in, but no one knew where to send them. The officer, unaware of the growing attention online, was focused on the boy in front of him. As the boy began to trust the officer, he revealed more about his family's struggles and the challenges they faced just to survive. Each detail painted a clearer picture of how difficult life had been for him. The officer, moved by the boy's honesty, made a decision. He wouldn't stop at just helping the boy through the day. He would find a way to get him and his family the help they truly needed. But just as it seemed like the situation was moving toward hope, an unexpected twist changed everything. A new piece of information came to light that would complicate the officer's plan and leave everyone on edge, wondering what would happen next. The stakes were higher than ever, and the story was building toward a moment that no one could have predicted. Just when it seemed like things were starting to fall into place, the officer received a call over his radio that turned everything upside down. It was a report about a missing child from a neighboring town, a boy who fit the description of the one sitting quietly in his patrol car. The officer's heart skipped a beat as he glanced over at the boy, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. Could it really be him? The timeline and details were vague, but the possibility couldn't be ignored. The officer didn't want to alarm the boy, so he carefully asked a few more questions about where he'd been and where his family might be. The boy hesitated, his body tensing up as if he knew something was wrong. He gave vague answers, avoiding eye contact, and the officer could sense he was holding something back. Was the boy running away from something or someone? As the officer tried to piece everything together, the growing attention online was adding another layer of complexity. People were demanding answers. Who was this boy? What had led him to such a desperate situation? While some offered support, others began speculating, creating their own narratives about the boy and his circumstances. The pressure was mounting, and the officer knew he needed to act quickly, but he also didn't want to lose the fragile trust he had built with the boy. Then, out of nowhere, the boy finally spoke up. "If I go back, it's going to be bad," he whispered, his voice trembling. He didn't say much more, but those words were enough to send chills through the officer. Whatever the boy was running from wasn't just poverty or hardship, it was something deeper, something that made him afraid to return. The officer was torn. He needed to follow protocol, but his gut told him there was more to this story than what was being said. Every decision felt like a double-edged sword, and the stakes were higher than ever. As he sat there, weighing his options, a new question emerged. Was helping the boy stay safe going to mean going against the rules? Or was there another way to protect him and uncover the truth before it was too late? The answers were still out of reach, but one thing was certain: this story was far from over. The officer sat in silence, his mind racing with the weight of the boy's words. He knew he couldn't force the boy to talk, but time was running out. If the boy truly was the one reported missing, every decision would be critical. Taking a deep breath, the officer calmly told the boy, "I want to help you, but I need to know the whole story. Whatever it is, you're not alone in this." For a moment, the boy looked like he might shut down again, but something in the officer's voice gave him the courage to speak. He confessed that he had run away, not because he wanted to, but because he felt he had no choice. His family had been staying with a distant relative who had promised to help them, but the situation had turned dangerous. The boy hinted at mistreatment and fear for his younger siblings who were still there. He had left, hoping to find help and return for them, but he hadn't known where to start. Hearing this, the officer's resolve hardened. He knew he had to act immediately. Following protocol, he radioed for assistance and contacted Child Protective Services to investigate. Meanwhile, he reassured the boy that his bravery in sharing the truth would help protect not only himself, but his siblings too. As the investigation unfolded, the officer learned that the boy's story was even more complicated than expected. The family had been living on the edge of survival for months, and their cries for help had largely gone unheard. But when the story of the officer and the boy went viral, it brought an outpouring of support. People began donating not just shoes and clothes, but also resources to help the family find stable housing and a fresh start. The boy and his siblings were reunited in a safe place, thanks to the swift actions of the officer and the community's support. But as the officer reflected on the events, there was one last surprise. The boy shyly handed him a folded piece of paper before they parted ways. Inside was a simple drawing of the officer kneeling in the snow, holding out the shoes. Below it were the words, "You gave me hope." In that moment, the officer realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples far beyond what we ever expect. This wasn't just about shoes or a single act. It was about showing someone they matter, even when the world has made them feel invisible. It was a story that would stick with him forever, and one that proved the power of compassion can truly change lives. In the days that followed, the boy and his family began to see their lives transform. With the help of the community, they were able to move into a safe, warm home where they could finally start fresh. The officer stayed in touch, quietly checking in on them and ensuring they had everything they needed to rebuild. He didn't see himself as a hero. He had simply done what he felt was right. But to the boy and his family, he had become so much more. He was the person who had seen them when no one else did, the one who believed in them when they were at their lowest. The story continued to resonate far beyond their small town. The photo of the boy and the officer kneeling in the snow became a symbol of kindness and humanity, sparking conversations about the importance of community and looking out for one another. People began sharing their own stories of unexpected help and the impact it had on their lives. It was a reminder that no matter how divided the world may feel, moments of compassion can bring people together. As for the boy, he started school again and began dreaming of a brighter future. Inspired by the officer's actions, he even spoke about one day wanting to help others in need, just as someone had helped him. His family, once on the brink of despair, found strength in the support they received and worked hard to build a new life filled with hope. The officer often thought about the boy and the simple moment that started it all. It was proof that even in the coldest, most challenging times, one small act of kindness can change everything. And for everyone who followed their story, it was a lesson they would never forget.